Welcome back to Climate Mundial's Energy and Climate Weekly. Today it is my pleasure to present the first of two interviews with Dr. Odin Knudsen, who's returning to the channel after doing a first interview back in August, which made Odin a little bit of a fan's favourite. So it's my pleasure to be able to present to you again a new batch of interviews, including and featuring Odin. In this particular video, we're going to explore the Gaza peace deal, which was announced recently through the United States presidential administration. But in terms of Odin's experience, we have a real expert here who's had direct experience as a World Bank employee during the peace process to do with Palestine and with Israel. So with Odin's experience, having worked in that field for many years, we'll have the advantage of being able to reflect on the prospects for the peace deal in Gaza with a real expert. So it is my pleasure to be able to present that to you today. And without any further ado, let's get right into it. Greetings, Odin, and welcome back to the channel. Thanks very much for making the time, and we're really looking forward to the discussion today on the Gaza peace process and the geopolitical issues and energy security related matters that arise as a result of the conflict that we see in West Asia or the Middle East, depending on your frame of reference. So thank you very much, Odin.
Well, thank you for having me again, Daniel. It's always a pleasure to talk about these things and renew old times together. I still have your gloves, by the way.
No. Well, that's something we'll sort that out eventually. Yeah.
That was a big swap. I swapped a hat for a pair of gloves.
And I still have the hat too, by the way.
Good.
Great hat.
Good. I think I got the better deal though.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, Odin, on this topic, so on the last interview we had, you did mention a little bit in your initial introduction and background about some of the work you'd done in the peace process regarding Palestine, Israel, and working with Yasser Arafat during your time working at the World Bank. So as a sort of a general introduction and refresher for some of the audience, could you please maybe just explain a little bit more about the sorts of things you're involved in and in particular what your thoughts were on the work that you did during those times?
Okay. Well, after the Oslo Accords were signed in 1993 with a similar celebration, but this time on the White House lawn, as took place in Egypt, I went to, as the World Bank's representative, to Gaza and Jerusalem to backstop the political process with an economic program, and that was with the World Bank. And during that time, I lived in East Jerusalem, where I interacted pretty much with both Palestinians and Israelis, the foreign ministry, and Perez particularly, who was obviously very well involved in the peace process, a little bit with Rabin. And then I also lived in Gaza, just above the old Israeli Coast Guard headquarters. And that was the initial place that Arafat located himself. And so I was there as Arafat came into the Gaza Strip. And my job was basically to do economic reconstruction and to build the basis of a state, which includes everything between sewage systems, water pricing, and up to forensic laboratories and everything else. So I had several $1 billion of foreign assistance to implement. Became quite close to Arafat, met some of the Hamas people that were there at the time, and continued that process for about 3.5 years until after Netanyahu was elected. And I went essentially, at that point in time, I went to the his major advisor at the time, Golden was his name, Dory Gold, and said that, I could introduce them to some of the Palestinians and we could work together, as I'd worked with Rabin's regime and Perez, who took over as prime minister. And they said, we have no interest. We have no interest. This is Judea, Samaria. We have no interest in going forward. And so that was the time that I really understood that this process was over. And it lingered on. The Palestinian Authority tried to assert control. Hamas became stronger, financed in part by Israel through Qatar. And we ended up in the situation we have today, which was first October 7th, with a much more powerful Hamas and a non-existent Palestinian Authority in Gaza, and increased settlements into what the religious Israelis believe is to be the true historic Israel, which is the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and continue on taking over that, and on the verge, perhaps, of annexation of the West Bank. And Gaza was sort of locked up into a giant restricted prison camp area until Hamas broke out. And then, as everyone knows, the big tragedy that has taken place since then, with unknown of tens of thousands, maybe 70,000 Palestinians killed, many, many more Israelis that are unacceptable, both army and, of course, in the kibbutz that was on the border, and the prisoners taken up into this, which could be a historic moment.
That's, very interesting. So what you probably say then, or, to characterize the time when you were working there, that there was at least a strong intention for economic development to align with the overall peace process, on the expectation that eventually the peace process would be successful, and then prosperity could be delivered to the people in the region through those investments, and that, which sounds like a very laudable objective, but obviously requires that peace process work. Is that a reasonable way to characterize the sentiment when you were engaged there?
Yeah, I think that all that we could do, the political process was outside of our hands. That was taking place, sometimes behind closed doors, with the United States looking in, and all we could do is backstop that process. So every time there was a new area that we were allowed to go into, let's say on the West Bank, to build roads or sewage system or schools, rehabilitate schools, that required the political consent. So the way I viewed it at the time was to keep hope alive, keep the prospect that there could be peace. And I felt, and I made some pretty good sacrifices to do that, was that the flame, the pilot light for the Middle East, the explosion of the Middle East, was sitting there in Palestine. And that without Palestine, that issue being solved, the Middle East would continue to be volatile and disintegrate more, which it has. So it was just a key moment. My other duty was to see if I could make Arafat presidential, and which is, it's a challenge. So I did that. And that period of time, I have a book that I've written that's going to come out. I don't have a publishing date now. It's called Arafat's Analyst, which is historic fiction covering that period through this, the rise of the signing of the Oslo Accord and things like that. And if I can plug my old book, so everybody can plug
Please,
that. So
please do.
this is God willing. Can you see that? This is basically another book that really you get an understanding of the conflict
Mhm.
and also of the archaeological history, the biblical history, and the controversy around that. It's based upon a true event that took place, which was the murder of an American archaeologist when I was there. Because archaeology is political in Israel. It's not because it's the basis of the justification or quote unquote the occupation of Israelis' land.
Very interesting. So, Odin, if we then sort of flash forward to where we are today, or at least in the last few months, we've seen publication of a new peace plan, which seems, let's say, somewhat ironic given how many attempts there have been over the years to bring peace to the region. Now we have this 20 or 21 point plan, which has been published by the presidential administration in the US, seems to have a degree of support from regional partners. But I wondered if you could opine just for a moment on that peace proposal and let us know what your thoughts are. What probability of success would you assign to this kind of proposal?
Well, I think if you go back to 1993, when the Oslo Accords were saying, there was hope that this could be, there could be peace, that there could be. And there you had Rabin and Perez basically the leading up that, and particularly Rabin, because Rabin was viewed as tough, and he had killed. And I think the Israeli public looked at him and said, well, hey, if he's going forward, then we have trust in him. And then you had the right wing opposition, which was led by Netanyahu. And Netanyahu had a different vision, basically coming from his father. His father had that vision too, which was for the greater Israel, from sea to river. And that was their motivation. There was no, but as long as Rabin was alive, he stood in the way. And at first, I think they were less ambitious. It was basically to allow the Palestinians to take over the major cities in the West Bank, Hebron and Jenin and things like this, because it was very difficult to administer. To put soldiers in those areas, would make them very vulnerable to violence. And then progressively, it got more and more ambitious. But on the other side was the right wing, who were, calling Rabin a traitor, a Nazi, and part of that group was Netanyahu. Netanyahu was in the parades where they strung up effigies of Rabin as in a Nazi uniform and everything. And the tragedy took place there, where the big rally that took place in Tel Aviv, I think it was Tel Aviv, where Rabin was assassinated. And they sang the song of peace at that time. Once Rabin was gone, the process lost its trust. Perez was never viewed with that kind of strength. Although at the time he was 20 points ahead in the polls, and he fell behind. So the years leading up to now has been basically the brilliant maneuvering of Netanyahu, who never accepted the idea of a Palestinian state, the two-state solution, but he had to accommodate essentially the US and basically slow walked any kind of negotiations to that. And now finally, comes out and says, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And then Trump's elected. The Democrats were all those Democratic presidents were kind of maneuvering and said, well, this is an issue that the Palestinians and the Israelis need to work out together. They need to sit down at the table. They need to negotiate it, etc. Under Netanyahu, the Israeli government had really no intention of going that far. In the meantime, this radical movement became stronger and stronger. And of course, Netanyahu puts together the coalition that allows him to stay in power, which takes these radical right wing. So the thought of a two-state solution was dead until Trump. And that is the coup d'etat, the unexpected that has taken place. And Trump deserves credit. We are now back on the White House lawn, where Rabin was shaking hands with Arafat. There's no, Netanyahu didn't show up in Egypt. He said for religious reasons. Didn't show up there. He wasn't going to shake hands with whoever was going to shake hands on the other side. Hamas didn't show up there either. And we're back on the White House lawn. The White House lawn now is Egypt. But there's two things that have changed. In the days of 1993, there was, the sentiment in the United States was pro-Israeli. The sentiment in Congress was pro-Israeli. We were, whatever Israel wanted in terms of weapons and assistance, the largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid, it got. Okay. That has changed. Now the polls are moving in the United States, against Israel. And especially among the new generation, under 30 years old. So the guarantee that you have the support of the American public, and that's what you absolutely need, is not there. Mm. The second thing that changed is you got a deal maker. And Trump views himself as a deal maker, if you're working New York real estate, you can make a deal anywhere in the world, right? That's not exactly a picnic grounds. That's really so he comes in and he doesn't know this thing. He doesn't know what's really truly possible. He says, I'm going to bring them together. Mm-hmm. And then Netanyahu makes a fatal mistake. I don't know if it's fatal or not. He makes a terrible mistake. He attacks Qatar in the middle of the negotiations and tries to kill the Hamas negotiators. Trump is now, and I think you just don't want to be on the other side, Trump is now angry. What the hell are you doing? And you have this incredible situation that you couldn't even write a movie script about. In the White House, essentially, Trump is saying, here's the phone, cameras are rolling, you, Netanyahu, call and apologize to Qatar. Whoa. There's no Democratic president, there's no Clinton, there's no Biden that would have done that. Trump does it. He takes basically Netanyahu by the collar, the ruff of his neck, shakes him real hard and says, apologize and do it. Thirdly, the 2 points. Thirdly is Trump has a different view of the Middle East. It's Middle East, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia. There's a lot of rich guys there. There's a lot of business opportunity there. So he's sitting there saying, hey, Qatar, you got the air base, you got the thing. You gave me a 747. I might need a second one. joke. You know, is there? So the things change. And then you have the weakening of Hamas. Now, Hamas could still persist, but it's losing support inside of Gaza, 60, 70, 80,000 people killed. How many more can be killed? Starvation, everything else that's taking place. So Hamas is a little bit more willing. And in a different way, Trump has taken Hamas by the scruff of the neck and says, you want to live? You want to continue to fight another day? He doesn't say that, of course, but in Hamas's mind, that's what they're hearing. Yeah. And so they do it. And by that time, with the world public opinion, the hostages become a liability. So Hamas is much more interested in making a deal. Now, one could characterize this, and hopefully it will come to more than this, as, oh, this is just a hostage release deal. Well, that's it, and it's over. And once people go home from Egypt and all over the Gulf, people will forget about it. I don't think so. I think that there is movement, and there is a certain level of fear in the Israeli government that their dependency for weapons, their dependency for petroleum, their dependency for money, their dependency for a standing in the world, their dependency for US political support is on the line. They don't like it. I'm sure some of the settlers don't see it that way because God will take care of them. But that's the situation. So we're in a different situation than when I was there in 93, 94. We're in a different, and the main difference is because the geopolitical forces have changed and Trump's here. But the same problem exists that existed in the day after Rabin was assassinated and Perez lost the election. Netanyahu, in his heart of hearts, has no intention of a two-state solution. He has no intention of a one-state solution where Palestinians have rights. So that has to be overcome. And apparently, I don't know what the latest poll, 70% of the 70% of the Israelis don't want a two-state solution. How can it come about? How can it come about then? And the only way it can come about is by the U.S. And the question is, will Trump continue to be willing to take Netanyahu by the scruff of his neck and saying, you will do what I tell you. I have $22 billion of military aid. You're petroleum dependent.
And that's very interesting as well because of let's say, these dependencies that you've mentioned just now, Odin. And what we've seen in respect of President Trump over the last 9 months or so is that he's quite mindful, or at least it appears that he's very mindful of the real leverage, or is at least willing to test the leverage that the United States has with other countries to try and compel those countries to do certain things. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. We can go into that perhaps another time with the other examples, but at least in this case here, Israel appears to have quite a lot of, and this also connects to the broader themes of energy security and energy policy, that we cover on this channel as well, it looks as though Israel does have some strategic dependencies, which, notwithstanding what the domestic policies and so forth is, leaves them somewhat open to being compelled to go in certain directions, particularly if you've got a really strong supporter or ally, even though there's no formal alliance between the US and Israel, with a strong president, as it were, really pushing for this. It does seem like there's at least some potential for some give to occur in this system. But my question here is, given the fact that there's been so much invested in this particular approach, whether it be by Netanyahu or in Israel generally, to what extent can they make a change without there being very serious political consequences? You've mentioned how many casualties we've seen. There's been expense. The economy's been suffering. To what extent can there be a change in policy here without there being very serious political ramifications, particularly inside Israel?
Yeah, I think Israel, how that would be maneuvered or not. I think, and this may be wrong, but I spent a lot of time in Israel, and I had a lot of friends in Israel, and people that I worked with, on the peace process, both in the military too. And there is one thing that dominates, and that's fear. It's like a residual from the Holocaust. It is a residual from the Holocaust. It's fear. And that fear, is persistent. So how can that fear go away? How can it be managed? The way it's been managed so far is militarily. Make ourselves as strong as possible, this country. Nobody will touch us. We have a nuclear weapon. We are willing to use it. We are willing to kill tens of thousands of people. Don't screw with us, right? And where's it gotten them? Basically in a place where there isn't a solution. How in the heck do you rule 2 million, 3 million people in the West Bank, 2 million in Gaza? You don't. And the next step, which would be an interesting one, is let's say there is this security force as part of the agreement. You're going to have Arab country soldiers in Gaza, outside of Gaza, next to the Israeli military. So they're supposed to shrink their lines back and things. Whoa, that's a big change. When is the last time a Turkish soldier set foot on the land of Israel? Not since the Ottoman Empire. So it's things are changing. The question is, the issue is, can it hold? Will Trump continue to keep the focus on it? Will he hold it together? I mean, if he can hold it together for at least a year, he's a slam dunk for the Nobel Peace Prize. And it's obviously one of the accolades that he would like to have. So this is the thing. I think a lot of negativeness come out, and all the weaknesses of the 21 point agreement, and is it going to be implemented, and what about the detail and everything else? Yeah, that's all true. That's all true. See, when negotiations take place, the way traditional State Department, Foreign Administration negotiations take place, they have a kind of an idea, and then they sit down with this big piece of paper, and I've been there, and they argue over little words, and this and that, and this word, that word, this word, this word, this, and they lose sight of the bigger goal. In this case here, Trump says, and I'm not interested in the detail. Just do it. I want peace, man. I want peace. I want prosperity in the Middle East. I want to do business in the Middle East. I want my children to do business. I want my friends, they want to do business in the Middle East, right? Yeah. The U.S. is, in the truth, the U.S. is, and this will get me in a lot of trouble to say this, but has sacrificed its own economic interests for the interests of Israel. Now it can say, hey, Trump is only interested in the economic parts, the business parts of it. And there's lots of money out there, and there's lots of business, and there's lots of things to do. And you and I touched on it in the beginning. Is it? And it's not. I mean, you were actually one that caught up onto it. The energy situation in Israel is not promising. Yeah. Natural gas. They have natural gas. They've developed those fields. They've now an exporter of natural gas. It's a huge, huge, huge change. But they're still a petroleum importer. 90 whatever percent of their need for petroleum. And you don't run, like you were saying, diesel. And you think, and you need jet fuel for your fighter planes. And I don't know exactly what it is, but JP-8 is the jet fuel for imports. And it's doesn't come from baking oil. It doesn't come from, vegetable oil that I know. So you have a certain level of dependency. And when it was another interesting thing I didn't know before, hit the refinery in Haifa, it hurt. And suddenly now they had to import refined petroleum products, not just raw, crude oil. So it's, in this world, a nation is dependent. There is no independent nation. I mean, perhaps if I knew more about Bhutan, I would say, well, that's independent. Not even China. China needs the world, needs to sell. The U.S. needs the world. And so does Israel. And so does Jordan. And so, surprisingly, does the Saudis. So it's an interdependent world. And that's where that basis for peace hopefully can come about. You already see in the press this morning where Israel is saying, well, the Hamas, and this is where they're going to start to pick. They're going to pick. They violated the release of the prisoners, the remains of the prisoners. They've only released 4 remains. We got Gaza. I mean, you've seen the pictures of it and things, the burying of that thing, and you got to find nothing. And there's probably tens, well, maybe thousands, maybe 10,000 of dead bodies underneath that rubble. And in there, you got to find the thing. So they'll pick away, trying to get an excuse to re-engage. It's going to be a very, very tricky couple of months here. And hopefully, because the only one that can bring about this peace is the United States. And without that thing. But it's an existential crisis for Netanyahu and for many of the people that are trying to live in the historic Israel, the West Bank. So it's interesting. We should have a good time of predicting what's going to go on.
Well, that's really interesting, and I guess the key message, if you like, from some of the things we're discussing today is really for the audience, to keep a very close eye on especially the energy security situation for Israel? Because as you've correctly pointed out, there may be a transition that's occurred on gas supply, where Israel's been able to turn itself from being a net importer of gas, where supplies were coming from places like Egypt historically, now into a situation where they can actually export gas. But the real key here is oil dependence and refined product dependence as well, given that one of the refineries has been damaged there as well, and the criticality of energy supplies to being able to continue to carry out these sorts of campaigns and activities. So that could be the pressure point. Plus we have, as you've mentioned, a president who feels, at least for the time being, particularly motivated to solve this problem. So those could be the key areas for the audience to really look at and pay attention to, because I don't think there's that much discussion about Israel's energy dependence and that vulnerability, if you like, that plays a part in its capacity to continue to hold its line. So those are really important points. But if you had to, Odin, look at this issue of what's going to happen next, and as it maybe as a final area to discuss for today's episode, what do you think are going to be the developments where we can really, what can we expect to see over the next few months and perhaps next half a year, given where the situation has arrived as of today?
I think what we're going to see is a lot of pushback from Israel as long as Netanyahu is in power. Will his government fall? That will change the situation. So you're going to see a lot of pushback from him, and unwillingness to move his troops back into, progressively back out of Gaza. I think some pushback from Hamas, who will not like to lay down their arms. They feel that they are in an existential situation now. So we'll see that. Will the Arab states, the Middle Eastern states, Turkey and that, including them, will they be willing to put troops or security forces into Gaza? Will the Israelis allow it? Can the Israelis stop it? So these are going to be the critical steps. And then, I participated of the rebuilding of Gaza already, with billions of dollars of money and billions of dollars of money floating in from the Gulf, and very, very competent contractors that I worked with, and who had built the Gulf states, essentially. So we had all the things. Will that happen again? People can't live in Gaza right now. They can live in tents. Gaza gets cold. They need water. They need food. They need to reconstruct. They need to bring some hope. Can that be done? Will there be willingness for that money to come in? Will the willingness of the contractors, will the willingness of the people who live there, who've gone through this incredible trauma, can vengeance be suppressed? Vengeance for some of the Israelis, vengeance from some of the, certainly from the people's families that have been killed, the young men who are there. I've seen the volatility of these young men. It's not, take hope away from people become desperate, and they either retreat and hide and curl up, in the States, or they strike out. Can there be something in there that's bigger than that? So this challenge is huge, and I think that if it's successful, wow, what a wonderful, wonderful world. The Middle East is beautiful. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to visit. it's a great people, generous people. Israel, it's a beautiful country, good people, and it'd be wonderful. Or are we on this black side? Does the devil still walk along the coastline there? Into the dark alleys of Jerusalem, into the dark alleys of Hebron, the dark alleys of Jenin, the dark alleys, Gaza City, Khan Yunis. I don't know. But somehow hope has to be created. Hope for the Palestinians, security for the Israelis. And that's the big, huge challenge. If I was younger, I would love to be part of it again. I'd do the crazy thing again, and all the organization that takes place. So.
Well, that's fantastic, Odin. Thank you very much for sharing those insights. And I think, ironically, it's through sharing this type of experience, as well as analyzing the situation with respect to what you know and understand about the real context on the ground from personal involvement, can actually be somewhat inspirational for others and helpful in the process. And certainly for the viewers, it's a great privilege to have you, share those on the channel. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much. I'm looking forward to our next interview regarding the situation on perhaps the other important issue of the day, being Russia. But on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the next occasion we have to speak.
Thank you, Daniel. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I'll issue a challenge to your viewers. Have them do an estimate of the climate implications of war. How much CO2 emissions come out of war. And I haven't seen it done. That would be lovely. And the other challenge for you is see if you can explain to us, from the United States, what are the rules of cricket?
Now that,
if you can do that, you can solve the Middle East problem. If you can tell me why those guys, unbelievable.
challenge accepted.
All right. Take care, Daniel. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Odin.
And so there we have it. That is the interview with Dr. Odin Knudsen about the Gaza peace proposal. What did you make of it? Please let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do so. Remember, of course, that we have a target to achieve 500 subscriptions on the channel by the 25th of December 2025. That's basically Christmas Day of this year, to achieve 500 subscriptions. So if you haven't already subscribed and you've enjoyed the content, please hit subscribe. If you've got family, friends and colleagues that you think may enjoy this content as well, please, by all means, share the video with them and encourage them to subscribe to the channel. That would be really helpful, and with a view to being able to achieve the target by Christmas of 2025. That's the 25th of December 2025. On that note, I'd like to say thank you very much for your attention today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon on the next episode of Climate Mundial's Energy and Climate Weekly. Bye for now.